It's September 1957. In a secret deal, an American book dealer clinches the bargain of a lifetime. His prize, a curious map that threatens to turn the history of exploration on its head. The map apparently shows the known world in around 1440. Nearly half a century before Christopher Columbus's famous voyage. Where modern maps place America, it depicts a mysterious island called Vinland. And a few lines of text make the extraordinary claim that Viking adventurers had reached American shores as early as 1000 AD. Had the Vikings really discovered the New World 500 years before Columbus? Could their knowledge, passed down to later mapmakers, have even told Columbus where he was going? From the moment it surfaced, the world's most famous map caused bitter controversy. Some historians denounced it as a fake. Others insisted it had to be genuine. Scientists have subjected the map to an exhaustive series of forensic tests, but even they are sharply divided.
If it's a fake, it was done by a master of forgery. I cannot believe that any person at that time can have had the knowledge and the tools, the skills, to carry off a forgery of that quality.
We can see no option but the fact that this must be a forgery, a modern 20th century forgery.
It's too complicated. It's too beautiful. I think it's real.
If it is genuine, it's a fascinating historical document. If it's not genuine, it's the biggest con trick that's been pulled on cartographical society in a very, very long time.
Is the Vinland Map genuine and worth millions? Or is it a valueless fake? The quest for the answer has led from the streets of old world Spain to the laboratories of the space age. But now, this program can reveal the true and extraordinary story of the mysterious Vinland Map. The Vinland Map is now owned by Yale, one of America's grandest universities. Once, it was proudly displayed in the showpiece Beinecke Library, the most valuable map in the world. But today, it's an embarrassment, locked away in the vaults. For behind the wrinkled parchment and faded ink lies a tale of murky deals, incredible coincidences, and vast sums of money. All because the map seemed to rewrite the history of exploration. In the Middle Ages, the Vikings were the world's great explorers. Between AD 800 and 1000, their restless energy drove them far from their Scandinavian homelands. The Vikings mastered the seas by designing sturdy ships that could cope in any weather.
It was a ship that would give a great deal with the wind and the waves, and therefore was incredibly seaworthy, although the comfort aboard on those open ships cannot have been great.
But the Vikings were not only hardy sailors, they were also skillful navigators, long before the invention of the magnetic compass.
They'd have been far more aware of what was going on around them. If it suddenly clouded over and you couldn't navigate, what direction was the wave coming in? Well, just keep the wave the same aspect of the boat and we know we're going to stay on course. Whereas we link up to a satellite to know where we are, they would use all these natural things around them to say, look, I'm about here.
The Vikings' robust ships and seafaring skills took them far across the North Atlantic. By AD 870, they had reached Iceland. Over a century later, they colonized Greenland. Clearly, the Vikings could navigate these waters. But did they get as far as America? 13th century chronicles of Viking history describe the discovery of Vinland, far to the west of Greenland. They are called the Vinland sagas.
The word saga means telling, oral tales. And they were stories that were passed down for the edification of the next generation. Some of them were for entertainment more than anything.
The sagas claim that Vinland was discovered by a Viking called Leif Erikson, who named it after the wild vines he found growing there. But for centuries, many scholars dismissed the Vinland sagas as myths and legends.
The sagas don't tell us enough to say exactly where Vinland began and ended. And the big dust-up has been how historically reliable are they?
The first clue that the sagas might be more than legends surfaced in 1957. In the middle of that year, two book dealers arrived at London's British Museum. One of them was a smooth Italian called Enzo Ferrioli.
He was very well dressed, and he was a very attractive man. There used to be a term many years ago, a chap with his characteristics was referred to as sort of a Latin lover, and I think Enzo Ferrioli fit into that.
Ferrioli's charm masked a darker history. He was a fascist who during the Spanish Civil War had fought with General Franco's troops. He now lived in Spain and exploited his connections to further his career.
He knew very well who he could buy just with little gifts, invitations to lunch, good cigars, good spirits and wines. In other words, he knew perfectly what everybody's price was in order to win their trust.
Ferrioli was hoping the museum experts would authenticate an intriguing volume he was offering for sale. The bulk of the book was a medieval manuscript called the Tartar Relation. The Tartar Relation was an obscure account of a papal mission to the Far East by two Franciscan monks. Copied down in the 15th century, their story was bound together with a remarkable world map that appeared to illustrate it. To the west of Europe, it revealed a new world, one that until now had never been seen on a map. Most startling of all was the island in the Atlantic labeled Vinland.
Here it was, in black and white. And it showed America in relation to recognizable parts of the world, such as Africa and Asia and the Scandinavian countries, Great Britain. No question where it was.
The 15th century map appeared to incorporate lost knowledge from earlier centuries. Above Vinland, a short inscription described the island's discovery by the Vikings. At a stroke, this appeared to confirm the sagas and cast doubt on Christopher Columbus's achievements.
I was taught that Columbus discovered the New World. So was every other child the world across. And so this then was revolutionary in that sense.
The fact that the Vinland map was bound together with the Tartar Relation gave it credibility. Two of the museum's experts were convinced that it was genuine. But the head of the manuscript department, Bertram Schofield, disagreed.
He was able to date ancient manuscripts within 30 or 40 years, and he couldn't see the circumstance under which these two manuscripts could become joined together. That made him suspicious.
Schofield was also troubled that Ferrioli would not reveal anything concrete about the map's previous history.
He had the last word as keeper of manuscripts and said, don't touch it with a barge pole, essentially.
Without authentication, Ferrioli would not be able to ask a high price for his map. It was time to try another tack. Geneva was one of the hubs of the European rare book trade. Enzo Ferrioli had a close relationship with the leading auction house. In the late 1950s, the firm of Nicholas Rausch held a series of auctions of books and manuscripts relating to the discovery of America. Many of the items were consigned by Ferrioli.
There had not been a sale in a generation or more of the type of book that was being offered there. So the books drew the people.
But without proof that it was genuine, Rausch would not sell the Vinland Map. Instead, he introduced Ferrioli to an ambitious young American dealer, Lawrence Whitten.
He was a linguist familiar with most Western European languages, and his catalog descriptions were erudite. He was a very knowledgeable dealer.
Away from the close scrutiny of the sale room, Ferrioli offered Whitten the Vinland Map. He implied it had come from a private collection, but refused to give further details. Despite this lack of a proper pedigree, Whitten was captivated.
Whatever the Vinland Map and the Tartar relation may ultimately prove to be, I fell under their spell in 1957.
Whitten then took the biggest gamble of his life. He paid Ferrioli $3,500 for the Vinland Map volume. In 1957, this was big money. But the American had a hunch that he would soon recoup it, many times over. At his home near Yale, Whitten turned detective. If he could prove that the Tartar relation and Vinland Map were both produced before 1492, the date of Columbus's discovery, he stood to make a fortune. The Tartar relation was mainly written on paper. On it, Whitten discovered faint watermarks of an ox's head. A reference book pinpointed when the paper had been made. There was now little doubt that the Tartar relation was an authentic medieval manuscript. But the map was drawn on parchment, animal skin. What was its date? Parchment can be carbon dated, but only by destroying it. In 1995, a group of scientists were finally allowed to cut the smallest sliver from the map.
Here was this thing worth many millions of dollars. It was horribly nervous. I was a nervous wreck during the time the thing was going on. I calculated later that the value of the piece we sliced off was $40,000 or $50,000. And of course, one doesn't do that lightly. One does it very carefully.
Carbon-14 dating can often only provide a very approximate date for an object. But by a lucky chance, the Vinland Map's parchment could be dated to within 11 years of 1434. This was breathtakingly close to the date of the Tartar relation.
This is certainly one of the best radiocarbon dates that's ever been obtained.
In the 1950s, Lawrence Whitten had no scientific means of dating the Vinland Map. So he tried to prove it had always been bound together with the authentic Tartar relation by examining the damage left by bookworms. He needed to show that the wormholes through both documents were in exactly the same position. But try as he might, Whitten could not make the holes line up. Despite his efforts, Whitten had come to a dead end. Yale offered to buy the Tartar relation, but not the map. A year was to pass before his fortunes were transformed by a quite remarkable coincidence. In the winter of 1958, a friend from Yale's Sterling Library called him. Tom Marston was curator of classics and a manuscript collector. He was excited about some items he had bought from a British dealer. One of the manuscripts was part of a well-known medieval history by a certain Vincent of Beauvais called the Speculum Historiale, or Mirror of History. The British dealer had bought it from Enzo Ferrioli. Something about it struck Whitten as strangely familiar. That night after dinner, he sat down with the Speculum Historiale and compared it to the Tartar relation and the Vinland Map.
My adrenaline began to flow as it dawned on me that the wormholes through the Vinland Map exactly matched those at the front of Vincent de Beauvais' Speculum. While the ones in the Tartar relation just as perfectly matched those at the end of the same volume. As far as I was concerned, the Vinland Map was authenticated then and there, beyond any reasonable shadow of doubt.
It now appeared that the Vinland Map had once been part of a medieval volume containing two obviously genuine documents. The map was at the front of the volume, next came the Speculum Historiale, and finally the Tartar relation. Wormholes linked the map with the Speculum, and the Speculum with the Tartar relation. Whitten's gamble had paid off. As one scholar later put it, he had got the greatest bargain in all the world. Yale was now determined to own the Vinland Map, whatever the cost. Alexander Vitor, the curator of the map collection, turned to one of the university's wealthiest and most generous alumni for help. Billionaire Paul Mellon was hooked by the idea that one map could radically rewrite America's history. The exact price he paid has never been revealed, but in return for hundreds of thousands of dollars, he made one crucial demand.
Well, he wanted it to burst on the world and that everybody would be thrilled and this would change all history. So my husband came back and said, "You've got to keep it a secret and not tell anybody about it because I'll be in great trouble with Mellon."
Over 6 years, 3 scholars prepared a lavish book to promote the Vinland Map as genuine. But Mellon's insistence on secrecy meant they could not sound out other experts who might have been more skeptical. Paul Senger is an authority on medieval books. He believes that there was never a proper debate about the authenticity of the Vinland Map.
The normal reaction is to show it to as many learned people as possible in order to find the true extent of its significance. What's discomforting in this instance is that there seemed to have been an effort to control the group of people who were to be consulted with a sort of agenda in mind to validate its authenticity.
By 1965, Yale was prepared to reveal its closely guarded secret to the world. The only decision that remained was the exact date for the launch. And here again, Paul Mellon had the last word.
Everybody in those days had a featherweight diary, and Mellon got his out. I'm going to be shooting, I'm going to be fishing, I'm going to be, and so forth and so on. And suddenly, on October 11th, he was going to be at a meeting up near New Haven, and so he said that would be the perfect time.
Mellon's choice of date could not have been more provocative. October the 11th was the eve of Columbus Day, the public holiday when America celebrates Christopher Columbus. The launch party was a lavish affair. Its centerpiece was an ice sculpture of a Viking longboat created by Yale chefs. As ambassadors mingled with academics, Alexander Vitor playfully donned the helmet sent as a gift by the King of Norway. He had no inkling of the storm that was about to break. By casting doubts on Columbus's achievement, the Vinland Map challenged many Americans' sense of their national identity.
The 21 million Americans will resent this grand salt of Columbus, especially released in a day that we're honoring him.
Do you have any children?
I have one boy, yes, sir.
You're going to send them to Yale?
And never go to Yale. That would be the last university as far as I'm concerned.
But amidst the controversy, a dramatic revelation appeared to vindicate Yale. Since 1960, Norwegians Helge and Arne Stine Ingstad have been searching the Canadian coast for evidence of a Viking presence. At the fishing village of Lens-aux-Meadows in Newfoundland, they were taken to the remains of what locals described as an Indian camp. The Ingstads began an excavation. Over the following years, they uncovered the remains of what appeared to be typical 11th century Viking buildings. But the artifacts left no room for doubt. The only people who produced bronze ringed pins and iron nails like these were the Vikings. The Ingstads' announcement, just a month after Yale's launch of the Vinland Map, provided the final proof that the Vikings had beaten Columbus to American shores. But was the map itself genuine? Many scholars were not convinced. They argued that there was no evidence to suggest that Vikings ever used maps.
They had their sailing knowledge in their heads, and they conceived of their world not in terms of drawing diagrams that other people could see. There's literally not a single map that shows any kind of cartographical drawings from the Norse in the Middle Ages.
The doubters also suggested that Yale had ignored strange anomalies on the map. Why was the Vikings' own Scandinavian homeland drawn so crudely? And why was Greenland accurately portrayed as an island, even though it was not circumnavigated until the 20th century? As the chorus of doubt grew, Yale belatedly decided that scientific tests might help authenticate the Vinland Map. It was a decision that resulted in decades of controversy. At New Year 1967, the map, the speculum, and the Tartar relation were flown to London to the experts on ancient manuscripts. Most medieval inks absorb ultraviolet light and appear deep black, but the lines on the Vinland map fluoresced. There was clearly something very odd about its ink. But what? Yale now called in the Chicago firm of McCrone Associates. Dr. Walter McCrone was famous for his forensic skill with the microscope. Under low magnification, McCrone's team found that the lines on the map seemed to be composed of two different types of ink.
There was a yellow line, and wandering back and forth was a black line, or little pieces of black pigment. The yellow line was very distinct, while the black line was flaking off.
McCrone asked Anna Tietzoff to lift tiny samples of the ink for analysis. The polarized light microscope can help identify many substances by the way they react to different types of light. Under reflected light, the yellow particles appeared white, whilst light shone through them made them seem black.
It was kind of a unique material. It would have to be something like anatase.
Anatase is a form of titanium dioxide that occurs naturally as a mineral ore. When refined, its reflective properties make it ideal as an ingredient for paints and pigments. Synthetic anatase was not produced until after 1914. Could the Vinland Map ink really contain a modern paint pigment? Anna Tietzoff picked a particle from the yellow line on the map. It was time to examine it under much greater magnification. The transmission electron microscope gives a very precise image of size and shape. Jagged, irregular particles of widely varying size, like these, would signify the naturally occurring mineral anatase. But McCrone's Vinland Map samples were a different shape. The yellow particles were nearly all the same size and had rounded edges. That indicated that the ink must contain synthetic anatase.
We knew from then on that we weren't dealing with an ancient map. It was a modern ink.
Yale was shocked and embarrassed by McCrone's revelations. A spokesman now admitted the famous Vinland Map may be a forgery, and the scientific debate focused squarely on its ink. Brody Neuenschwander knows just how a plausible medieval manuscript could be faked. He's an art historian and calligrapher who can write in the style of ancient scribes.
I originally started with an interest in medieval manuscripts and was very interested in learning to imitate medieval styles of writing. It's also the case that you can't really write a proper medieval letter if you don't understand the inks that they used.
In the Middle Ages, the most commonly used ink was called iron gall. Iron gall ink was cheap and easy to make. Galls are growths caused by the larvae of wasps in oak trees. These were crushed to a fine powder and boiled in water to make a solution that looked like tea. Gum arabic, a kind of glue, was mixed with ferrous sulfate, a mineral source of iron.
The thing that makes ink ink is the reaction between the iron in the ferrous sulfate and the tannin from the oak tree. These produce a rusting reaction on the page. The tannin and the iron together are oxidizing on the page and actually burning the letter into the surface.
Over time, iron gall ink changes in color.
The strokes of the pen will leave a grayish mark, and within an hour or two that will blacken, and within the next year or two it will blacken completely, but within the next century or two it will start to go brown.
Many medieval manuscripts have been stained brown by iron gall corrosion. But Walter McCrone had proved that the Vinland Map's ink was not iron gall. His theory was that a forger had tried to simulate the browning effect, but would McCrone's results stand the test of time? Since the late 1970s, a team at the University of California, headed by Professor Tom Cahill, had been using atomic technology to identify the elements in ancient inks. Cahill wondered if his technique could shed light on the Vinland Map. Shielded inside a 10-foot concrete shell is the cyclotron. It uses an immensely powerful magnet to accelerate protons to enormous speeds. The protons are then focused in a beam down a steel tube. When the beam strikes an object, it generates a unique signature that measures the amount of each element that is present.
The sensitivity is very great. In principle, we can see down to thousandths of a millionth of a gram of material.
Over 2 days in 1985, Cahill's team took over 150 readings from the whole of the Vinland Map.
Location 28, ink, Finlandia. Start.
First, they analyzed sections containing both ink lines and parchment.
Beam on.
Then they measured blank parchment nearby.
Beam off.
Subtracting the two results produced a list of elements in the map's ink. Walter McCrone had reported large concentrations of titanium, but Cahill was astonished to find hardly any.
Now, McCrone had assumed that the yellowish brown in color was caused by anatase, which is titanium dioxide. If there's no titanium, there's no anatase. Therefore, the yellow-brown color could not be caused by the anatase, which he had inferred.
Cahill now argued that McCrone had either been selective in his choice of particles, might have been contaminated by flakes of modern paint falling from a ceiling.
Well, a small amount of material like that on the map could have been picked up as a crystal, and then analyzed and looked like modern paint. It might have been modern paint.
But Anna Titsoff is adamant that her samples came directly from the ink lines on the map.
A lot of the particles were still attached to tiny little fragments of parchment. They were directly glued onto the parchment.
Cahill's results reopened the possibility that the Vinland Map might be genuine after all. Yet he also confirmed that its ink was very different from that of the Tartar Relation and Speculum Historiale, both of which were written in iron gall.
I was worried a little bit about the differences of the inks, but our manuscript people said that when people did maps, they generally used a much finer ink than they did, let's say, for just writing text. So the point was they would normally use a more fluid ink on a map than normally on a text.
Rodi Neuenschwander disagrees. Iron gall would have been the perfect ink for a medieval scribe to use on a map.
The fine lines that you can make with iron gall ink are just about the finest that any ink will give you. You can write a whole line without dipping your pen again, and that's really very useful for the scribe.
So the big questions remained. Why didn't whoever drew the Vinland Map use the obvious ink? And what was the yellowish pigment that McCrone had identified?
The ink is the correct brown for a centuries-old map, and exactly how the writer achieved that seems to be a little bit of a puzzle.
Could a new scientific technique resolve the debate about the ink once and for all? Maggs Brothers is one of the world's largest and oldest antiquarian book dealers. Today, chemist Dr. Catherine Brown is visiting to analyze the inks on some of their most decorative manuscripts. Raman microprobe spectroscopy uses a laser beam to energize the molecules in the ink. The resulting spectrum of emission is like a fingerprint. This 15th century manuscript has been illuminated with a variety of pigments. The Raman microprobe identifies them all. Red is vermilion, blue is lazurite, and white is white lead. The ink itself is iron gall. In the summer of 2002, Brown went to Yale with Professor Robin Clark to test the Vinland Map. Their conclusion was unambiguous.
We confirmed that there is anatase on the yellowish-brown lines under the black. It wasn't dust from titanium dioxide in the white paint on the ceiling. It was deliberately placed as part of the ink. We can see no option, but this must be a modern 20th century forgery.
Two separate scientific studies have now shown the ink to be modern. Yet the Vinland Map's defenders are not willing to concede defeat.
There's a million ways you can prove the map to be a fake. There's no way you can ever prove it to be authentic. It's very difficult for science by itself to give you a definitive answer. We can help, we can encourage, but we are not the final answer.
Although science by itself cannot be conclusive, this film has uncovered new details about the Vinland Map's shadowy history that reveal it to be a cunning confidence trick. The trail leads back to the home of the map's first recorded owner, Spain. The Cathedral of La Seo in the city of Saragossa contains one of Spain's greatest libraries. The cathedral authorities here are still embarrassed by a scandal from 40 years ago. In 1957, a scholar noticed that manuscripts he had previously consulted had disappeared. An investigation revealed that over 100 priceless texts had gone missing. The police were called in and swiftly arrested their prime suspect, Enzo Ferraioli. At a special tribunal, the prosecution claimed that Ferraioli had charmed the librarians. They had allowed him to roam at will through their collection.
Apparently, Ferraioli took away the books very slowly. Some he would borrow and wouldn't return. But other books he would smuggle away hidden in newspapers, in a bag or a briefcase. And then, of course, the perfect system was to destroy the record cards, so nobody could ask for these books. The answer from the archivist was, these books are not here because they don't appear in the index.
Ferraioli was convicted of theft and sentenced to 8 years and a day. But he was released early due to ill health. No one knows if the Tartar relation and speculum historiale were amongst the documents stolen from Saragossa. But a new witness has come forward to reveal that the Vinland Map's only link to these genuine manuscripts was brought about by Enzo Ferraioli as part of a cunning confidence trick. Diego Gomez Flores is a retired rare book dealer. He was born in France but emigrated to Spain after the war, where he married. Gomez first met Enzo Ferraioli in Barcelona in the early 1950s and regarded him as something of a show-off.
I thought straight away that he couldn't keep quiet. He loved having spectators.
Gomez remembers a day in 1955 or 1956 when Ferrioli gave him a lift in his distinctive Fiat Topolino. The Italian bragged that he had obtained the manuscript of the Tartar relation and bound it together with a map to increase its value.
Had folded it and placed it in the binding. In order to pass it off as authentic, the map had to be bound in. So it was the form in which they were able to sell the book, as if the map was part of the book.
Gomez's account reveals that the Vinland Map was not originally part of an authentic medieval manuscript and must therefore be fake. But although Ferrioli bound the map with the Tartar relation, how he obtained it remains uncertain. So who might the forger have been? After 10 years of research, historian Kirsten Siever has proposed an intriguing suspect. Joseph Fischer, an Austrian Jesuit. Fischer was an authority on world maps of the 15th and 16th centuries. Siever says she has compelling circumstantial evidence to link him to the forgery.
Father Fischer certainly had a fondness for discovering maps that showed the first of something. He discovered the first map with the name America. He also believed that there was, of course, a Norse discovery of America, and that the Norse had left a record somehow of where they had been when they sailed to Vinland.
Siever thinks that Fischer believed so firmly in his theory that in the mid-1930s he set out to create a map that he thought should exist.
He would not have looked upon it as falsifying the cartographic record. I also doubt very much that he made the map deliberately for others to see. I think it was essentially a private exercise.
Siever reasons that all Father Fischer would have needed was some basic equipment and materials. She thinks he used blank medieval parchment taken from the Speculum Historiale, a copy of which was provided to him by a Swiss auction house. Siever believes that Fischer mixed black India ink with yellow ink to make it look older. She even points to similarities between his handwriting and the text on the Vinland Map. If Siever is right, it's ironic that Father Fischer's firm belief in the Viking discovery of America has now been confirmed by archaeology. Over 40 years, the Vinland Map has been both celebrated and damned. Today, Yale meets every twist in the strange tale with the same wary response.
We don't take a position on the Vinland Map. I believe very strongly that we are here to make material available for scholars to use. As far as it's being real or fake is concerned, that is for the scholars who study it to determine.
And those scholars are still arguing as vigorously as ever.
On the internet, the Vinland Map is still discussed as though it was a life and death matter. I think this is just a very natural human trait to argue over these things. I don't think the argument will ever stop.
I think it's all part of the scientific ethos that we are interested in knowing answers to questions and finding out what's true and then dismissing speculation that is clearly not true.
If carelessness is allowed to fester, as it has in the case of the Vinland Map, where nobody asked the right questions in time, then we're all the losers. And we should set the record straight.
Setting the record straight also means acknowledging the enduring achievement of Christopher Columbus. He may have been beaten to America, but Columbus was the man who linked the old world forever to the new, and without a Viking map to guide him,